you need to care about your insulin. You need to really change your lifestyle, and it's really how we move and what we eat so that we can have bodies that are sensitive to insulin, which means we don't need to use a ton of insulin. Hi friends, welcome back. Today I have a very exciting announcement to make. And this is I can't believe the day is finally here, but next week I have a brand new book that I co-authored with Dr. Benjamin Bikman, and it comes out next week. It comes out on July 9th. I'm so excited. We've been working on this book for over 2 years, if you can believe that. So the day is finally almost here. So today what I would like to do is to share with you Dr. Bikman's first book called Why We Get Sick: The Hidden Epidemic at the Root of Most Chronic Disease and How to Fight It. Now, this is important because the book that Ben and I wrote together is the follow-up book to this one. And so I want to share the really powerful message and the really important work that Dr. Bikman does and what we can learn from it. And then next week, I'm going to share the new book with you, and I will go over everything that we share in that new book to really follow up this question of, well, what do we do about it, right? How to not get sick is the title of the new book. But today we're going to talk about why we get sick, right? Why are we getting sick in the first place? And this is something that, we're all aware of. There's cancer, heart disease, there's Alzheimer's and dementia, there's type 2 diabetes, all of these diseases that are just rampant. There's hypertension, weight gain and obesity, fatty liver, low testosterone, infertility, rapid aging. There's a lot of things out there that we have to worry about, right? All of these ways to get sick. And what's really cool about what Dr. Bikman discovered, and he is a scientist and a professor, but what he discovered is that all of these diseases are either caused or made worse by insulin resistance. And so he just did a deep dive on what is insulin resistance, why does it happen, and really most importantly, what can we do to really reverse, because most of us have it, reverse and prevent ourselves from getting this condition that really leads us into disease. Okay, so the first important thing to understand is that insulin resistance impacts almost all of us. And so, Ben is the scientist and he has all of the stats and the facts and all of that. But one of the stats I pulled from his book here is that upwards of 88% of all adults in the United States have some degree of insulin resistance. And so there are several different ways to figure out where you are on that scale of insulin resistance. But really, the big takeaway here is that insulin resistance is something that I need to worry about it. You need to worry about it. Everyone in your life needs to understand and adapt their lifestyle to really prevent having bodies that become resistant to insulin. For most of us, unless we have some kind of connection to diabetes, we don't really think about insulin. And for those of us who aren't doctors, we're not scientists, you might even think that insulin is it's either a medication for diabetes or it's something that, type 1 diabetics, their bodies don't make it. They have too much of it, too little of it. We just associate it with someone who has diabetes can deal with insulin. And really what Ben teaches us is that's not the case. Every single one of us needs to understand and be concerned with how much insulin it takes for our bodies to maintain our appropriate blood glucose levels. So let's get into a little bit of the science of, Dr. Bikman's research and really why it matters to us. Okay, so just back to basics. Insulin is a hormone. It's created in our pancreas, and it is really utilized to regulate our blood glucose levels, right? And so we eat something, insulin is released into our body so that the blood glucose can be pulled out of the blood and stored in a whole bunch of other areas in the body. What's really unique about insulin, it is a hormone. What's unique about this hormone is that it impacts every single cell of every single tissue in your body. So you can see how this one hormone, this one little key, right, to this whole balance that makes up our whole body, when it gets out of balance, can really have a negative impact on all of our organs. And I think that's one of the key things that Ben really noticed and figured out was like, wow, when our bodies start requiring more and more insulin to do the job, because really, in a nutshell, what is insulin resistance? That means our body is creating a tolerance for insulin. We usually think of tolerance when it comes to alcohol, and we understand that if you drink regularly, what one glass of wine used to do now takes 2, and then down the road it'll take 3, etc. Well, the same thing happens with our bodies and insulin. Our blood glucose is elevated. So if we have sugar in our blood more often than not, or increasingly, your body can start to become tolerant of a certain amount of insulin, and it's going to require that your pancreas double that. It's like, okay, now at this doubled amount of insulin, we can get the job done to a point, and then we need more insulin to get the same job done, right? Your body's always going to work to create that balance that you need, right? And so in this instance, your body is trying to make sure that your blood glucose levels are healthy and normal. And most of us know that if you have elevated blood glucose levels, you are, you either have type 2 diabetes or you're certainly like close to getting type 2 diabetes. It means that your insulin's just not cutting it anymore. So insulin resistance is essentially the many steps, and this can happen over decades, in between having an insulin sensitive body, right? One where it just takes an appropriate amount of insulin to get the job done, all the way to needing more, having type 2 diabetes where your body just cannot produce enough insulin. It cannot get the job done anymore, right? And we kind of think in those two extremes, like, hey, I'm fine, or I have type 2 diabetes. Like, no, there's many steps and shades in between where the body is like in this decline of its ability to really utilize insulin efficiently. It's becoming tolerant of insulin. And so Dr. Bikman, noticing this, and then when you read this book, it's a lot of science and a lot of it. And so for some of you, you're going to love the science part. For me, I like to understand the cliff notes of the science, and I totally believe it, but some of it goes over my head. But he can show in the book how insulin resistance, so getting closer to type 2 diabetes, will have this either cause all of these diseases or make the progression of these diseases worse. So again, that being cancer, heart disease, dementia, diabetes, hypertension, weight gain, all of the things that we talked about, all of these really scary diseases that we don't want to get. Insulin resistance, this need to pump out more and more insulin into our body, is making all of that worse. Okay? And so what do we do about it? That's like the big question. Now that we're aware, because really the first step is understanding you do need to care about your insulin, right? It's not just, hey, if the doctor says that my blood glucose levels are fine, that doesn't mean that you're not insulin resistant, right? Because the doctor's not measuring how much insulin is in your blood. He's just measuring how much blood glucose is in your blood. So if your insulin is through the roof, but it's still managing to get the job done to keep your blood sugar where it needs to be, there's still a ton of damage happening to all of your organs. And that's really the big call to action that, Dr. Bikman figured out in this book, and what he's really trying to do and trying to make a difference by letting others know. You need to care about your insulin. You need to really change your lifestyle, and it's really how we move and what we eat. And we'll get a lot more into that, and especially next week when I show you the new book, which is a lifestyle guide on how we move and what we eat so that we can have bodies that are sensitive to insulin, which means we don't need to use a ton of insulin, right? We can efficiently create, our pancreas can create what we need, and it's not increasing, which is leading us down this path of disease. So it's really exciting. Like when you get it, it's like, it starts to sink in, and you realize how empowering it really is to understand that this hormone insulin, if this hormone insulin is the key to all of these diseases, and we know what we can do to help our bodies be efficient in using as little as possible of this hormone so that we stay sensitive, insulin sensitive, we can prevent so many of these unpleasant diseases. So it's really exciting. It's a lot of science, guys, and I understand I'm not usually, talking about a whole bunch of science, but I am really passionate about it, and this is why, I did pair up with Dr. Bikman to create this lifestyle guide to really help us to learn how to live in a way to have healthy bodies. And it's really not that hard. That's the thing. At the end of the day, our lifestyle is made up of a bunch of habits and a bunch of things that we do every day. And when we can intelligently design a lifestyle that allows us to maintain bodies that are sensitive to insulin, we can really hold on to health longer and be more vibrant and more functional and just feel better, which is pretty awesome. So next week, I'm going to go into all of the details of the new book, How to Not Get Sick, by Dr. Benjamin Bikman and myself, Diana Keuilian. But for today, I do want to leave you with 4 tips that Ben shares in his first book, Why We Get Sick. And I really do highly recommend that you either read or listen to Why We Get Sick so that you can really just have a deep understanding of insulin resistance and why it's important, right? Why should you care? And why should you really help others in your life who you care about? Why should you help them understand how important it is to control our insulin levels? So the 4 tips that Ben gives in his first book that we really go into in more detail in the follow-up book. Number 1, control carbs. So most of us know this, but carbohydrates, specifically sugar, is like a really bad one, but really just all carbohydrates in general are going to require higher amounts of insulin to do the job, right? It increases our blood glucose more than protein and fat. It's just the way it is. And so paying attention to the carbohydrates that we're eating, when we eat them, how much of them we're eating, what we're eating them with, really controlling carbs is one of the first things that we need to do to increase our insulin sensitivity and to really help us to stay away from all of these diseases that we do not want. So controlling carbs. The second thing is prioritizing protein. Now, protein is such an important nutrient for us, and it's really easy to eat a diet that's pretty low in protein. And when you look at what you're eating instead of protein, it's usually carbs. So by really making an effort to control carbs, you're probably naturally going to be looking for a way to fill in the gap. Like, okay, I can't eat all these carbs. What am I going to eat? You're going to prioritize protein. And then his third tip here is to fill with fat. And so understanding which fats to eat, not being afraid of fat, which is different for a lot of us, especially those of us who were paying attention to the media in the 90s who told us to not eat any fat. And that, messed with me for a while. But really understanding that healthy fats are important and fat does not impact insulin. And so if you're replacing some of these carbs with healthy fats, you're prioritizing protein. And then the other thing that he talks about in his first book, and we go into great detail with the second book, is doing some intermittent fasting. And so when we're not taking in any kind of food, we're drinking water, but we're not taking in any food at all for 12 to 18 hours at a time, this gives our body a complete break from insulin, right? And so if you think about, well, how do we loosen that tolerance or reduce that tolerance to insulin? Well, we go periods of time without using any of it, right? And so Dr. Bikman recommends in his first book having at least a 12-hour fast between dinner and breakfast, right? So if you finish eating dinner at 8 p.m., not eating breakfast until 8 a.m. Most of us do it anyway. It's not really that difficult, but just being really conscious of not taking in anything that could spike your insulin in between those hours. And then throwing in a few days a week where you make that time frame 18 hours, right? Giving your body these big breaks from using insulin in order to reduce that tolerance, reduce that resistance. So that is, in a nutshell, the Cliff Notes of Why We Get Sick, a really incredible book by Dr. Benjamin Bikman. And like I said, I'm so excited to share with you next week our follow-up book that we co-authored together and we've been working on for a couple of years. And it has recipes, it has exercise routines, it has more of Dr. Bikman's science and kind of a simplified version. What do I really need to understand from all of this to apply to my life and to the life of my family so that we can live longer and really not have to bother with these chronic diseases. So I hope that you will be back next week to learn all about the new book. And if you go onto Amazon, you can pre-order it. It is How to Not Get Sick. And again, this is Why We Get Sick by Dr. Benjamin Bikman. So thank you so much for joining me today. Please subscribe, drop me a comment, and I will be back next week and I will share the new book with you. Take care.